The morning sun had barely climbed above the tree line when Marcus Calloway arrived at the Veldren Racing compound at 6:47 a.m., a full hour before his shift officially began. He didn't do it to impress anyone. He did it because the silence of the garage in those early hours was the only peace he had left in his life, the only place in the world where the noise in his chest went quiet. He had spent 22 years inside that building, first as a 19-year-old apprentice who barely knew which end of a wrench to hold, and eventually as the quiet, uncelebrated backbone of one of the most decorated racing teams in the country. He had built things with his hands that other men stood in front of for photographs. He had never once asked for the credit. That Tuesday morning, Marcus noticed something wrong with the engine of car number 7 before anyone else had even poured their first cup of coffee. There was a faint metallic whisper in the idle, almost nothing, the kind of thing only someone who had spent decades listening to engines the way a musician listens to an orchestra would ever catch. He crouched down beside the car, rolled up his sleeves the way he always did, and got to work. He wasn't assigned to that vehicle. He wasn't asked. He simply saw a problem and fixed it, the same way he had always lived his entire life. He didn't know that the new CEO, a man named Garrison Holt, had walked into the facility that morning with a legal pad, a three-piece suit, and a mission to make cuts. Garrison was 34 years old, recently promoted from a corporate acquisition firm, and had never watched a single race from anywhere other than a skybox. He had spent his first week at Veldren walking through departments with narrowed eyes and a philosophy that any labor that wasn't officially documented in a job description was a liability, not an asset. When he turned the corner into the main garage and saw Marcus, gray at the temples, grease on his forearms, no supervisor present, no work order in hand, bent over the engine of a car he wasn't assigned to touch, Garrison didn't ask a single question. By 8:15 that morning, Marcus Calloway had been escorted to the Human Resources office and handed a termination letter. Unauthorized interference with company property. Liability concerns. Effective immediately. He sat in that chair and read the letter twice, not because he didn't understand the words, but because he was trying to decide whether to feel angry or simply tired. He chose tired. He had a 10-year-old daughter named Priya waiting for him at home, a girl who drew pictures of race cars because her father had told her stories about them since before she could hold a crayon, and he didn't have time to fall apart. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe to Echoes of Stories, because every story we tell is a reminder that good people deserve to be seen. What Garrison Holt did not know, what he had never bothered to learn in his week of clipboard-carrying tours, was that the Veldren Racing compound had been built on the hands of Marcus Calloway in a way that no organizational chart would ever show. 22 years ago, Marcus had arrived as a teenager from a small town with nothing but a mechanical instinct that bordered on supernatural and a hunger that poverty had sharpened into something fierce. He had worked under the legendary crew chief Aldous Pemberton, who recognized within 6 months that this quiet young man had a gift that couldn't be taught in any school on earth. Aldous had mentored him, challenged him, and eventually stepped aside to let Marcus lead the engineering on what would become the team's first national championship vehicle. Over the next 2 decades, Marcus had designed the load-bearing modifications on 11 of the team's 14 championship cars. He had personally rebuilt the suspension geometry that Veldren's engineers had dismissed as impossible, and which later became the standard adopted by 3 rival teams. He had once worked through a 40-hour stretch before a critical race weekend when the primary engine block cracked 48 hours before the green flag, and he had fabricated a solution from parts that weren't even meant for that model. The car won that Sunday. His name was not in the press release. He had done all of it while raising Priya alone. Her mother had passed when Priya was just 3 years old, a quiet tragedy that Marcus had carried without complaint, without self-pity, and without ever once letting it show in his work. He packed his daughter's lunch before sunrise and answered her questions about torque and traction in terms she could understand. He taught her that a person's worth was not in their title but in what they chose to do when no one was watching. He had lived that belief every single day of his professional life, and on a Tuesday morning in May, a man in a 3-piece suit had handed it back to him in the form of a letter. The termination rippled through the compound faster than Garrison had anticipated. By noon, 6 senior engineers had requested urgent meetings. By 2 in the afternoon, the team's lead driver, a fiercely competitive woman named Solène Adair who had won 4 championships in a career Marcus had quietly supported from the garage floor, walked directly into Garrison's office and placed something on his desk, a photograph. It was taken 11 years ago, on the night of the team's most celebrated victory. In it, the entire crew stood around car number 3 in a cascade of champagne and camera flashes. And there, at the back of the frame, half turned away from the camera the way he always was, stood Marcus Calloway. Solène told Garrison to look at the car's engine specifications from every championship year. She told him to pull the internal engineering logs. She told him that if he looked carefully enough, he would find a single recurring name attached to every breakthrough, every impossible fix, every quiet miracle that had kept Veldren racing at the front of the pack for 2 decades. Garrison Holt sat alone in his office for a long time after Solène left. He found Marcus that same evening at a park near Marcus's home, sitting on a bench with Priya beside him, both of them sharing a bag of chips and watching pigeons as if the entire day had been nothing more than weather. Garrison sat down on the opposite end of the bench and said nothing for a long moment. Then he began to talk, not as a CEO, not with legal language or corporate framing, but as a man who had made a mistake and knew it. He told Marcus what he had learned that afternoon. He told him what the engineers had said. He told him about the photograph. And then he told him that he was sorry, not the kind of sorry that comes with conditions, but the plain, uncomfortable, necessary kind. Marcus looked at his daughter for a moment before he responded. He told Garrison that he hadn't fixed the engine that morning to prove anything. He had fixed it because it needed fixing. That was the whole of it. That was the entire philosophy of his life, reduced to a single sentence, and he had said it the way people say things they have known for so long they forget the rest of the world hasn't caught up. He returned to work the following Monday. His role was formally restructured to reflect what it had always actually been, Chief Engineering Architect, a title that had simply never existed on paper because no one had ever thought to write it down. Priya drew a new picture that week and taped it to the refrigerator. It showed a man in a garage, surrounded by cars, with a small girl standing beside him. Underneath it, in her careful 10-year-old handwriting, she had written, "My dad fixes things." Before we close, drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been overlooked for something you gave everything to? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. There is a kind of person in this world who does not perform their goodness, who simply lives it, quietly, in the early hours before anyone arrives, in the choices they make when no credit is coming, in the way they raise their children to believe that integrity is its own reward even when the world does not agree. Marcus Calloway was that kind of person. And his story is not extraordinary because of how it ended. It is extraordinary because of how he carried himself through every moment before the ending, with grace, with work, and with the unshakable belief that what you build with honest hands will eventually speak for itself. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you are, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Echoes of Stories. These are the stories that deserve to be told. Thank you for listening.